New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. It's an honor to have you amongst us today. If you could please take it from here, over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this program, which IMPRI is organizing. And very happy to do my bit in discussing public policy and especially the science and technology aspect of it. So let me now share my screen and then we'll go ahead because I think that's a better way of proceeding. Okay. So the session is going to be on science, technology, and public policy. I've left out innovation, though I'll mention it. Innovation is also a very important part of this. What is normally discussed as STI, science, technology, and innovation. However, let's go ahead. Before we start, let's see what are some basic concepts and why do we need a policy for science and technology. Now, science, as most of you know, is the basic knowledge of nature, and technology is the practical application of such knowledge. Innovation, on the other hand, is how we adapt scientific knowledge for practical purposes. Now, all countries, their governments have certain objectives. And to put it in the simplest form, the objectives are national security and securing the best quality of life for the people. And both these are to be understood in the broadest sense. How does science and technology come in? It has a strong impact on the international system. It can confer economic power and military power to a country. And it can also, as we are now seeing, the artificial intelligence has a disruptive effect on society. Therefore, the state has to respond to advances in science and technology. It cannot remain aloof. So it's like a horse. A horse is galloping. You have to be in the saddle and control it, how it goes. So science, technology, innovation, policy, and practice is very important. And governments at all levels have a role. The central or federal government, state, and local and even city governments play a role. Now, science, technology, and innovation takes place within a national ecosystem with many players. This ecosystem of ours interacts with similar ones across the world, like US, UK, Europe. And these interactions must be managed and exploited. We'll come more into this later. So, public policy requires an appropriate and effective response to all this. We are not in an isolated island. We are part of the global ecosystem. The national ecosystem is there. It has interactions with external ecosystems. Now, science and technology has moved from small laboratory, Madame Curie, working in a garage, and now it's with large institutions with large budgets. I mean, we can see Manhattan Project during the war. Governments and business have got involved in funding of science and technology, and they have built large facilities and put in place policies. Now, very important, science and technology knowledge comes from a human brain. And that's very, very important. That's the necessary condition for advancement in science and technology is human knowledge expertise. Private and public sector entities also play a role, but skilled human resources are an essential component. And this underlies the whole knowledge economy. Now, while this is necessary, it is not a sufficient condition. There are other things required also. Now, science and technology has a disruptive effect. It can change the balance of power. For example, atomic energy, the nuclear technology changed the whole balance of international power. Also, economic activities, for example, ICT can change. It can give you competitive advantage. Within countries, it can increase inequalities and cause job displacements and losses. Now, since science and technology give you economic and military power, obviously countries try to control over it. And now the control can be formal and informal. The formal control regime is the IPR system, where you have to pay in order to use some science and technology. And informal is the regimes like the Nuclear Suppliers Group, Wassenaar Arrangement. This is not a treaty, but it's a group of countries who work to prevent this. Now, of course, when technology is denied, countries try to acquire it by Overt and covert. Overt means that you enter into technology collaborations, you pay for the technology from the provider. Covert means you do some sort of spying. And there's been issues now. For example, China has been accused of spying on US, within the US, to acquire technology which it cannot otherwise get. Also, if technology is denied and you can't get it, then some countries will try to develop it themselves, indigenous development of technology. For example, we had to do this both in our nuclear and space program. North Korea is doing its own development of nuclear technology and so on. So, because of all this, we can't rest. Society is not going to be stable and unchanging. It will always be turbulent, and science and technology advances will always create new challenges, and we'll do that in the future also. So, some basic ideas about public policy and science. Now, it's similar to economic, cultural, or sports policy and other domains. It means that science and technology must be integrated into public policy. And we can just look at it maybe two or three aspects. The science in public policy, where scientific inputs and advice go into making public policy. Then you have public policy for science. That is, how does public policy strengthen the S&T ecosystem? How do we strengthen our scientific muscle? The science for public policy, that means how do you strengthen the support for public policy through scientific evidence? Now, the science, technology, innovation ecosystem, about which we'll talk a little later, is part of a national ecosystem. And a strong science and technology ecosystem is very important for national development. So public policy has to put this at the center. Now, where does science come into public policy? The increasing number of global challenges such as climate change, artificial intelligence, cyberspace, all this, these are all heavy with scientific content and public policy. So you need scientific understanding. So many of these challenges are transdisciplinary and they require understanding and application of science and technology as well as public policy. Therefore, it's important that scientific experts must dialogue with policymakers so that an informed and appropriate policy response can be fashioned to challenges. Developing countries are particularly at a disadvantage in this effort because, firstly, important science advances originate in the advanced countries. And by the time they reached developing countries, a lot of international agenda and things have already been set. So they are more or less reacting to this. So it's important that developing countries strengthen their capacity to integrate science into public policy. And this is very important, especially in areas like climate change, environment, and health, because they affect population, entire population. So policymakers must have a minimum level of scientific knowledge. Not they don't need to be experts, but they should be aware of some of the important implications of science advances. And therefore, puts a responsibility on scientists that they must communicate with policymakers and stakeholders the implications of new advances and developments, but not in academic jargon or in academic papers, but in clear and understandable terms. So this is very important. The public also needs to be told that, look, these are the things which will happen due to certain advances. Now, how does public policy strengthen science and technology capacity? Well, you need to react well in time to new science and technology developments so that you have early and timely responses to emerging and new developments in science. There's also, you need to participate more actively or more effectively in international discussion in science, technology, and global challenges, whether it's climate change or cybersecurity or whatever. Then you need to facilitate participation in large international science and technology programs and projects. For example, like CERN, a Large Hadron Collider. We have other like the ITER project. Now, what these programs offer, because these are facilities which are beyond the capacity of individual countries. They require large investments and a lot of effort. But participating in such programs is a very cost-effective way of getting a seat at the high table of science. So we should, public policy must encourage this. And in a way, we are happy, good that we've got involved in some of these programs like CERN, ITER, LEGO. But then there are some programs that we didn't get involved in. For example, the Human Genome Project, and then the International Space Station, when it came up long ago, we somehow didn't get into it. So these opportunities should not be missed because this is going to happen more and more in the future. As science and technology advances, the cost of doing research is going to go up. Bigger and more powerful facilities will be needed. We can't afford, even the US can't afford to do it by itself. So this is going to be a growing sector. And we need to support and facilitate science and technology exchanges and how it is commercialized to get concrete economic and strategic benefits. So here the problem is many of our scientists and researchers, they are more focused on publishing papers. They are not fully focused on the IPR side of science research. So what they are doing, uh, the it's not enough to just publish a paper. Of course, that gives you credit, but then you need to also see where you can generate the IPR from. Now, for this, it is important that at the early stage of scientific projects, when projects are being formulated, science research projects are formulated, some thought should go into what is the IPR which can come out of this. And that's also a selling point because if you can submit a research proposal where there is an IPR potential, then obviously funding agencies and others will be more willing to support it. Now, some countries have built this in very well into their in system. For example, Israel, the Weizmann Institute of Science, which is a research university, they have their IPR experts who sit with the scientists right in the early stage when project proposals are made. So this has a beneficial effect. Then another aspect is how do we fashion public policy so that the STEM diaspora, that means the science, technology, engineering, and medicine diaspora, which is in huge numbers in the US, an advanced country from India, how do we make full use of their capability and attract and retain talent? So one part is those scientists from India who are working abroad and in good positions. How do we engage them into our activities in different ways? We'll come to that. The second is how do we retain our talent, graduating out of IITs and our institutions, because the best of them often they seek opportunities abroad. So how do we retain the best talent? And third is how do we get the best talent from other countries? And there you see the US, Canada, Europe, even China now has got programs to attract scientific talent from across the world. So there'll be a competition for growing, for attracting talent. So question is, are we doing enough to attract talent, scientific talent from abroad? As I said, science and technology, the essential thing is the human brains. So the best brain, if you can attract, then you have an advantage. So now, for us as a developing country, development issues are very important. And science and technology and innovation is also critical. So we can use science and technology for our development issues. And we can also reduce the cost of development by using science and technology. So technology will enable us to do more with the limited funds we have. For example, the mobile phone has enabled the entire population actually to be connected and accessed for various things. Like it could even be used for literacy or health or telemedicine. So, we don't have to follow the old route, what the advanced countries followed for development. We can leapfrog in using technology and do more with less money, frankly. Now, development is to be regarded both ways, including our economic development, social development, as well as national security. So we can do both these, all these areas, we can work with science and technology. So the international community has realized the importance of technology in the achieving the sustainable development goals by 2030, so-called Agenda 2030. They have set up a technology facilitation mechanism under the UN with various UN agencies involved to help with meet the targets. Now, unfortunately, this mechanism has not really gotten off the ground. It has been organizing occasional meetings, but the actual flow of technology and supporting finance has been weak. So this needs to be, it's an opportunity here for India and other countries to do. So I can talk about that a little later. Now, as far as the Sustainable Development Goals is concerned, NITI Aayog is the Indian coordinating agency for this. And you can look at what work they have done, the developing of indicators, to see how different states in India have performed. So it's a very rich field for young researchers and public policy to get into. This whole effort to achieve the SDGs and being undertaken at various levels within the country. Now, obviously, it is very important for developing countries to share experiences in development. So, for example, if we have something, found a way of handling, say, cholera or some disease, that has obvious implications for many other countries which are also facing the same problem. So, experience sharing among the South is very important. And then in the South, we have frugal innovation because we always have limited resources to use. So money is scarce. So we have our innovators often find solutions which are very cheap and effective. A simple example is the bicycle ambulance because we have roads are not good, villages have only a bicycle track connecting them. So somebody has come up with the idea of attaching a kind of Thela to a bicycle. So it becomes a bicycle ambulance. So like this, there are a whole lot of innovations which have emerged, which are use less resources. See, these are quite important for developing countries. Now, at the G20 summit, during the time of the summit and in January, India announced two initiatives, which are quite important. One is the Global South Science and Technology Initiative. And that is meant to share India's expertise in fields like space, atomic energy, health, all the science fields to the global south. You know, and similarly from other countries in the global south, what they have to offer, we can also benefit. The second initiative was announced by Prime Minister was India will set up a global South Center of Excellence on development. And this has recently been operationalized under the name of Dakshin. The name Dakshin has been given, and the center is coming up with the help of RIS, Research and Information Systems, because they already had a global development center, which was a project that was going on, and this fits in quite neatly with that. So we expect to see more about this Dakshin entity in the future. So I talked about the science and technology ecosystem. So what does this consist of? Well, it's a complex ecosystem, and these are the parts: government science departments, state and local agencies, research institutions, academic institutions like IITs, CSIR labs, and so on. Then the human resources, both internal and external. So internal means those who are working within India, and external those who are outside who are potentially can be engaged. And the researchers who are deployed. How many researchers are deployed in various scientific work? Research infrastructure and facility. This is very important because you can have money, you can have researchers, but if you don't have the facilities and infrastructure, they cannot produce the result. So funding mechanisms, funding agencies, regulatory agencies, because some kinds of research have to be regulated by the government. For example, medical research, gene therapy, for example, or research on dangerous pathogens, etc. Then there is an IPR subsystem that there are patent office, the patent system, the patent lawyers and the people who file the patents. And then how do we convert the IPR into actual business? That is incubators, business development centers, and overall business environment is very important. How good is this ecosystem as far as enabling a young researcher to set up and convert his knowledge into business? Business community is very also important. Civil society, consisting of consumers and also involving social activists. So they are the ones who actually consume the result. Social activists important because sometimes the misinformation can result in a backlash against some product or technology. So a strong ecosystem can attract and retain global talent. So if you have that's what happened, for example, in the US or Europe. Their ecosystem is very strong, so they can attract talent from all over the world, including from our country. So STEM talent tends to migrate to better ecosystems. So maybe as we improve our ecosystem, we will be able to attract global talent as well as retain our domestic talent and even get back some STEM talent which has gone abroad. The public policy must try to strengthen the national STI ecosystem. There are some metrics by which we can measure how good our national ecosystem is. One is research intensity of GDP, how much we spend of the GDP on research, researchers per million population, and output of publications and patents filed. So these metrics are tabulated and updated by UNESCO and the World Bank and other organizations, and they are OECD, and they are all available. So we can compare how where we stand in relation to other countries. So let's look at that. Our spending, first metric, research intensity of GDP, we are at 0.7%, and we have remained at about 0.7, 0.65% for about 4 or 5 years. But that is much lower than other major countries like the US, China, Germany, Israel, and Korea. The US and China are spending like 2.8, 2.1%, and much larger economy. So obviously, their total funding for research is very much bigger. Korea is a leader with 4.6%. We can't hope to reach that. But we should try to reach somewhere between 2 and 3%. That is something which is important for India. Number of researchers per million population in India was low, 262, compared with China, Brazil, even Brazil, Russia, USA, and even South Africa. So, of course, we have a large population. So, even if we have many researchers, the ratio can be low. But still, this just shows that we need to go much more upwards in this metric. And most of our spending on research and development is dominated by the government sector. The private sector is relatively low, about 35%. Now, in an ideal advanced country setting, the private sector spending on R&D is really comparable, 50%. Now, research output by way of publications, we are not too bad because out of the sheer number of our population, we are the third in the world. But if we compare per million, well, we wouldn't be doing so well. And then patents filed in India, well, 44% of patents were filed by from within India, researchers within India, and 56% by researchers from outside, mostly from 5 countries. And patent filing activity in India, we are at number 7. So we still have some ways to go by way of patents filed. The R&D spending of government agencies dominated by 12 agencies. Big one is DRDO, which has 31% defense, and these are the others. You would see that ICMR is about 3.1 because even though it has a health, we have a big health challenge. The big three are DRDO, DOS, and DA. These are the three big spenders, ICAR too, and the others are much smaller. The participation of our universities, both public and private, in research in India is quite low. Most of our universities are still focused on delivering education rather than R&D, except for maybe the IITs, IIScs, etc. Now we have a new education policy 2020, which is designed to improve the performance of our education sector, including higher education. And their policy calls for a national research foundation to be set up. That is one of the important recommendations. That has recently, there's been a legislation passed setting this up. Government is in the process of setting up the various machinery of the National Research Foundation. Hopefully, this will enable funding for research to be mobilized and used much more smoothly. Higher education institutions are now under the new education policy. They can develop international programs to benefit and attract talent from abroad. And we have seen some of IITs establish campus in the UAE. IITs have gone to Tanzania and other countries. So there is a demand for Indian See, a lot of foreign students come to India to study. And very often, the applicant students, they ask me very often that why can't we have a campus of an Indian institution in Africa? So there is the potential for aggressive higher educational Indian institutions to go and set up campuses in, for example, region like Africa or in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, etc. Now, so as science, technology, innovation policy of 2013 is being revised, and there have been a lot of consultations going on from 2019, 2020, and a new draft policy has been published after consulting a lot of stakeholders. But then this policy is not yet finalized by the government. So we are hoping that pretty soon the government will also issue this policy. In 2023, the government issued a space policy which opens up this sector for participation of non-government entities. That is opened up for business and private sector on various activities, both in the ground segment as well as in the launch vehicle, as well as on satellite payloads. All the entire sector has been opened up. And clearly, the idea is that it is time that the Indian private sector took up a lot of the work in the space economy and left ISRO to do the real challenging cutting edge research. So that seems to be the idea. And so far, the policy has evoked a good response. We at RIS are engaged with InSpace and Department of Space. We have a project on space economy development, basically to see how our space economy can be can be internationalized, how we can strengthen international linkages and presence in foreign markets. Now I'll come to a few specific areas of science and technology. In the health sector, we have just come out of the COVID challenge, and you can see what all happened. We had suffered a lot. We also did a lot of work through vaccines and other things. We helped many countries, both with vaccine, protective, and we also asked the WTO that please suspend the patent rights on COVID-related products for a limited period of time. So we made a big effort. I think we got some good results there. And then we used IT very effectively for the CoWIN platform as well as for other things. But of course, all countries found that their public health infrastructure had gaps, and we also had gaps. You remember we had bad experiences with migration, people migrating across the country during the epidemic, during the shutdown. The question of whether the shutdown was the best way to deal with this, a total shutdown or a graduated shutdown, all these issues came up. Not only India, China, all countries face this problem. So we are now developing, and the international community is now working on a framework for pandemic preparedness and dealing with pandemics. And by May 2024, we expect this final document, final thing to emerge after international negotiations at the WHO. Then in nuclear technology is another critical area. It's very important for our power program. It's also very important for our strategic program. So we suffered a lot, especially after we dared to undertake the nuclear test. But slowly we are now emerging out of this isolation. We've got a normal nuclear commerce thanks to the waiver, and we are trying to get into the energy. And our policy is that we have an independent nuclear program as other nuclear weapons states do. So we want to be treated on the same level as the other 5 officially recognized nuclear weapon states. We have challenges because there are new treaties which have come up, which to our mind do not accommodate us in a particular way. We have to deal with 2 countries, Pakistan and China, which are nuclear armed. We have a very good record of nuclear safety and security. We have an independent regulatory board, and we have a lot of applications developed in medicine, industry, and all that. So we are developing our nuclear power program. Both the indigenous reactors as well as the imported reactors are part of that. And we are also developing new types of reactors using thorium as a fuel, as well as small modular reactors. So now there is a thinking in the government to open up the nuclear sector to private sector participation. And so far, the opening up has been for custom applications of atomic energy, including medical applications for cancer treatment and irradiation for the agriculture sector. DAE has developed technology for using nuclear radiation to extend the shelf life of products like potatoes and other vegetables. That's of some interest. Another sector of very great importance, climate change and energy transition. So India, because of its size and economic growth, is a big player in climate change. No solution in the world is possible without India being in it. So the basic problem is we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to avoid climate changes. And how do we share the reductions, both across countries, within countries, etc. So climate justice and per capita emissions are important. Presently, we are at 1.1 degrees centigrade temperature rise, and carbon dioxide equivalent concentration is 410 parts per million by volume. 450 is the point where experts say is a danger limit. So we have growing energy needs, so we have to meet these energy needs. So obviously, we have to reduce the fossil fuel energy and push the non-fossil fuel based energy. And this is especially true of solar energy, nuclear, hydro, wind, biofuels, and hydrogen. All these are available. A little more work has to be done because we are used to burning coal and gas and all this to produce power. Now we have to think of tapping other sources. And we have to also think of how we can manage our transportation better. Electric mobility, buses and cars, then storing of energy, both in homes and businesses, is very important because if we can store energy and we can produce energy in the daytime, store it and use it at night. Simple as that. So India is doing whatever it can to fight climate change. We have ambitious targets for renewable energy, peak emissions. India is actively involved in the International Solar Alliance. We're promoting it. And also the new Global Biofuels Alliance, which was announced during the G20 Delhi Summit. International negotiations are not working too well. There are a lot of issues there. And civil society is very unhappy with the progress. And as you know, Greta Thunberg and many other people, they keep putting the pressure on governments to make better progress. So the role of subnational entities and civil society is very important to climate change because they are the ones who are going to suffer. And so their voices, if they are articulated, it will put pressure on governments to really come to agreement. And also, you know, for example, under Trump administration, the US government pulled out of the Paris Accord. But states, big states like California and New York, which are actually bigger than many countries, they committed, they said, we will remain committed to the Paris Accord. So here we have, you know, it is not just the central government, but large entities within the country whose support is very important. And these applies to big corporations also, big multinational corporations. Some of them are bigger than many countries in the economic side. Look, COP, Conference of Parties 28, which will be held in Dubai, is going to discuss a lot of difficult issues. And the issues are the question of net zero fossil emissions. Now, what has happened is India, as well as many other countries, have put forward this idea that we are not going to say, we are not going to commit to zero fossil fuel emissions. But what we are going to say is net zero. In other words, we will have coal and gas and plants generating power. But if we can remove the equivalent of carbon dioxide, which is emitted, then there is a net zero. So what they're saying is give us the space to keep some of our coal and other plants functioning, provided we remove the CO2. So net zero is a new thing. This has caused a bit of a upset among the European countries. They are not happy with this. I think they need to be better understanding of what we are talking about. You cannot overnight shut down coal or gas plants. So this net zero concept for fossil emissions gives a kind of transition period. And this includes removal of carbon dioxide, carbon capture and removal. The other very difficult issue is the loss and damage fund. Many developing countries have asked for a special fund to compensate them for loss and damage caused by climate change. So what they say is, look, we are hardly emitting anything, but we are facing so much of damage due to cyclones and other climate-induced disasters through no fault of our own. So we need help. So initially, the developed countries totally opposed this. They said there's nothing doing. This is not even on the agenda for several years. But now, at the last COP, they were forced. to say, okay, we'll discuss it. So now active discussions are going on the loss and damage fund. How will it be funded? Where the money will go? All that. So this is a positive development. Green climate financing, the pledge of $100 billion per year at the Paris Accord has not yet been met. And we are putting pressure on advanced countries, the rich countries, to fulfill this commitment. Now, there are new technologies for lower emission products, including removal of greenhouse gas. There is a carbon capture, use, and storage technology is coming up, whereby we can remove carbon dioxide from both the plants where it's produced as well as from the atmosphere and convert it into fuels or store it underground. So that's a negative emission technology, which could be very important. It is at the initial stages. A lot of science work is going on in this field. So it could give us a relief from the pressure of climate change. Now, there are some talk, the African countries met recently and they said we must have a carbon tax. That means anybody who, by producing or consuming a product, contributes to carbon emissions, there should be a tax. And the tax should be calculated according to how much carbon dioxide is produced in that process. So this is a carbon tax idea. The idea is that the people who pollute or emit more must pay. So this also applies to within countries. So we have a very rich segment of our society, which is a lavish lifestyle. They are emitting a lot of carbon dioxide. Well, the argument is they should pay a tax. The very poor people who don't contribute to carbon dioxide emission, they should not suffer. Then the EU has got a new proposal, carbon border adjustment mechanism, starting 1st October. And this is going to cause a big headache for international trade. Because what they're saying is that if you produce aluminum or steel in your country and you emit more carbon dioxide, then when you export it to our country, we are going to charge you a tax for the amount based on the amount of carbon. So obviously our business and industry will face problems in the EU market. So this is a hot subject. The next few months, our companies and who are doing business with the EU, exporting to the EU certain products, they have to be prepared how to handle this. There is a transition period of 4 or 5 months where tax actually will not be paid, but tax will be calculated. And then from 1st January next year, the tax will kick in. So it is a challenge for our business that here you have 4 months, get ready, prepare for this. Don't wait till the last minute and then start shouting that, oh my God, our products in the EU are going to suffer. So we have had fair warning. We are resisting this. The Indian government is saying that this kind of thing should not be done. In the WTO, we are saying that this will cause disruptions. But, the EU has firmly decided to do this. So we have to deal with it. ICT and digital infrastructure, I don't need to go into too much of detail. The main thing here is that digital manufacturing, artificial intelligence can cause a lot of job disruption. They can also give you a lot of advantages. If you can master these things, then you have a huge advantage. Social media has grown enormously. It is now becoming a challenge for governments because the messages, anyone can put out a message on social media. So governments now can't really control the narrative to the extent they were doing before. Cyberspace has become an area for criminals and terrorists to operate. So old treaties need to be revised. We have ICT enabled things in healthcare, education, finance. You all have used UPI and all those things, so you know about it. Business and government processes are being IT enabled. So you can sit at home and do a lot of your government business. Digital public infrastructure, which India has developed, that is the Aadhaar, the JAM Trinity, the Aadhaar UPI payment system, as well as the health, all these software packages. Many countries are very interested in this because they have seen how we have been able to spread it out. And our Ministry of Information Technology has signed agreements with at least about a dozen countries to give them access to this technology, and we are doing this free. We are not charging like Microsoft or Google or one of these tech giants. Life sciences, we know now how to manipulate DNA, and that enables us to change life, create new organisms. So this has a great impact on health, agriculture, and environment. But some research needs to be regulated. For example, should you allow scientists to work on developing a new and more deadly form of Ebola or a new and more deadly form of avian flu? So, how should this be regulated? And how should you regulate the industry so that these things don't go into the hands of terrorists? So, these are all issues coming up: regulation of R&D and harmful effects of biotechnology. Then there are ethical issues coming from, because now we can modify the genetic content of human embryos. We can modify the germ line, and we can produce, in theory, we can produce better human beings, taller, stronger, bigger brain capacity. Should these things be allowed? Or should we say that, okay, you can do this kind of thing, but only to treat certain genetic diseases? For them, it's all right, but you can't use it to enhance what you think is a human capacity. I mean, you might do this, but whatever creature you create, after 40 years, how do you know there will be no bad effects? So, we have to be a little humble about what we can do. Then there's a question of biodiversity protection. Today, our many species are in danger of extinction, dying out, and there are many species which are coming into new habitats and creating problems. There is a new type of mosquito which is spreading in African cities, which is resistant to a lot of materials, and it's spreading malaria. So we can have it coming here. This is the mosquito which it is Anopheles stephensi. It can live in cities, unlike the older mosquitoes, the other ones, and it's very well adapted to the city environment. So we could have a new outbreak of malaria spread by this mosquito if it comes in from Africa. So all these things are there. Climate change and environment protection, these are all affect life sciences. Environment protection is a huge but undiscussed problem all over the world. Today, our air, water, oceans, and soils are polluted with harmful substances. These are entering the food chain, entering our bodies, and reducing our life and causing disease. And we have any number of this in India. I mean, the fact that you don't die tomorrow or you don't get sick tomorrow doesn't mean that what you consume today and you keep consuming, after 20 years, you will not get cancer. So these are all things. Lead pollution is there in India because it comes from the spices and even our cooking vessels. We do have it. We have managed to get it out of petrol and diesel, but it's there in other areas. So there is an effort. The UNEP has been asked to set up a new body, scientific body, like the IPCC, to look into the effect of harmful chemicals on ecosystem. So it is time that we had a very strong scientific group looking into the various chemicals that are going to environment and what are the harm they cause, how they can be countered, all these things. So this body is going to be set up within a year or so and should make its own contribution. There is a new plastics treaty which is being negotiated. India is active, in fact, India actually introduced a resolution in the last unit. So plastics which are being dumped all over, including in the oceans, they release micro and nanoplastic particles. And these particles go into the environment and they go into the animal and human food systems. So this causes damage. They enter into our body. And India is playing an active role here. So these are all problems in the environment which require multidisciplinary action and multi-stakeholders. We cannot deal with this problem at the government level or by industry. Civil society and consumers must be involved. So that's why the Prime Minister has announced that on 1st of October, we should have a major effort to clean up our environment. And he's asked for every citizen to get involved in this. So we have to increase our consciousness and involvement at all levels. Then the issue of STEM diaspora. I said there are a lot of, the Indian talent in the US is enormous. I mean, we are leading so many companies and so many programs. So why can't we get them involved with our science effort? And all at central government, universities, business, all of them must have this opportunity. We should have flexible policies, simplify processes, remove bureaucratic delays for the flow of global talent come into India. We don't have too many clearances, too many visa problems. If somebody is a talented scientist who wants to come to India to give a lecture or to do a project with India or work with Indian scientists, we should have minimum obstacles for this to happen. So it is not that we want people to leave their job and come to India. That may not be the best solution. But we want them to work where they are with Indian institutions and strengthen our institutions. Give them our knowledge, give them the knowledge, help us network with us. And nowadays with ICT, you don't have to be physically present. You can collaborate online. Our universities need to harness the alumni connection. Most of the IITs, they have a huge number of alumni who are working in the US. So why don't they have a good alumni association? Our IITs should not take the approach that once somebody passes out, they're finished. They should say, look, we have created this human asset. This is our fellows. And we should remain in touch with them and bring them here or inform them about what they can do for our country. This is an approach of just saying that, look, oh, they've graduated now, our responsibility ends. We have given him a BTech. That's not the best thing. Government alone is doing some things on its level, but government has limits. They have done the CSIR, Prabhas, Ramanujan Fellowship they are giving, but these are all drop in the bucket. We need to do much more. So NEP 2020 offers some guidelines for what to do, but the STEM Connect is very, very important. If we have to go ahead in science and technology, we have to make better use of our overseas STEM talent and also make sure that our STEM talent don't migrate that much. Give them a better system here. So I'll conclude by just saying that look, science technology, there's an enormous amount of room for involvement in public policy, and public policy also has an enormous contribution to make to science and technology ecosystem, and especially for achieving our national development and the SDGs. So I'll stop here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an informative session. Before we move on to the Q&A session, I would request Mukul sir if he could provide his views. Mukul sir, are you here with us?
Yes, thank you very much. Ambassador Ashkar, this was really very comprehensive presentation, and it highlighted many of the practical policy initiatives that we need for realizing the goals of Amritkal, becoming a near developed nation, and to address the integrate science, technology, innovations into public policy better. One thought that after the COVID and even the climate change discussions that many analysts have raised is how important is the trust in the output of science and in what the scientists themselves are taking positions publicly and in the scientific institute, because there is a feeling that COVID, for example, was not very well served by the science and the scientists as well as scientific organizations. So how do we address this particular issue of trust, which comes in public policy in many guises? Because lack of trust often prevents governments from doing necessary reform.
Do you want me to respond to that or wait for a few more questions?
We can wait for a
I
few
think
more questions.
let's do a round of questions, 3, 4 questions,
Yes, yes,
and then
sure, sure.
uh,
Let's have
yeah,
more
go ahead.
questions, please.
Tripta, go and ask your audience.
Yes, we have a question from Ashish ji. Ashish ji, if you could ask your question. If not, I could. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Balakrishnan, many thanks for your insight. I was just wondering whether the multi-level governance of collective action problems is in itself responsible for some of the problems we face, and two, whether the evidence base has its challenges for developing countries in terms of the impact analysis of these problems like GMOs and climate change. So I'd like you to reflect on whether the current multi-level governance poses or brings about certain challenges, and two, whether we have adequate evidence based on the impact analysis of these collective action problems.
Okay, one more.
Great. Does anyone have any questions? You could feel free to raise your hands. So if not, you can go ahead with these two questions as and when.
Okay, any case, I think we are now close to 7. So let me take Professor Ashif's point about the lack of trust. That during the COVID, there was a feeling that scientific community is not being handling it well. The COVID was totally a kind of a new experience, not only for public and civil society and policymakers, even for scientists. It was a new thing which literally came out of nowhere. I mean, even today, we don't know from where it came. Although there are suspicions that, look, this was because somebody was tinkering with this bat, virus and released it. But whatever it is, so the scientific community initially was also taken by surprise. But I must say that within a record time, they not only sequenced the virus genome, but they also turned to, and that is where I must give credit to industry, they turned to producing an effective vaccine to control this. So there, I think the scientific community did a very, very creditable job. I think unprecedented. Nobody has made a vaccine in the time limit which this one was done. But where did they fail? I think they failed in the area of epidemiology and control measures. Like, the scientific community did not, or maybe some of them should have focused on how best to control the fallout. Should we have a partial lockdown, and what kind of lockdown should we have? Should we have it only, in focus areas and so on? So there was a big variation in response. Some countries didn't have any lockdown, like, for example, Switzerland. Some countries went to the extreme, like China, lockdown everybody. We also had a fairly severe lockdown. But then I think the government realized that, look, we cannot keep doing this indefinitely. So I think the scientific community there uh, missed an opportunity to really come out in front. Even the epidemiology was a bit confusing. Some people said India will have X million cases. Some people said it will be Y million. The models were not adequate. So I think there's a lot of work in that area. The social dynamics of the pandemic, that is where, and here I think social scientists and scientists need to work together. And this question of trust deficit comes in many areas. For example, even in GMOs, there is a big trust deficit. That brings me to the second question also. So, this, as I said, it is very important for scientists to explain the implications of their work in clear and understandable language to non-scientists, policymakers, civil society, everyone. So rather than just publish papers and go about in their rarefied circles, they need to come out of that and communicate with the public and in clear and understandable terms. I mean, that is also good for the scientists because Richard Feynman, one Nobel laureate of physics, an outstanding teacher, he could teach the most advanced concept in physics to a first year student, could make it understandable to even a layman. So he said that, look, if you really understand the science you're doing, then you should be able to explain it to somebody who knows nothing of science. So that is very important. Now, the second question is about multi-level governance. I think I wouldn't blame the multi-level government. It's important to have different levels of government involved: the center, the states, the districts, as well as the cities. See, they all have their respective roles to play. And in our system, for example, health is a state subject. It is not the central subject. The center only plays a coordinating role. So for better or worse, we have set up our system where we have, under the schedule of the Constitution, distribution of powers between the center and the state. Now, this I often feel that the public, many members of the public don't appreciate this. So if they know, for example, that the state government has the responsibility for health, then they would hold them more accountable. Education, another sector, concurrent sector. So I think the existence of multi-level government is not a bad thing. And even multi-sectoral government, that is going outside government to say, civil society, private sector, everybody must get involved in tackling a common challenge. The question is how best to synergize and coordinate all this so that we don't duplicate or waste resources or work at cross purposes. Like, simple example is one ministry doing something which has a negative impact on the work of another ministry. So per se, the multi-level government is not the issue. I think the issue is more of coordination of work of all actors. Now, GM crops, yes, this is a very interesting example. We have had a very high degree of activism by social activists working against GM crops. The same is in Europe. But, in Europe, the problem is somewhat different. In Europe, a lot of the opposition is because the European farmers are worried about losing out if GM crops come in, especially from US or Brazil or others. In our case, the GM crops can offer a huge increase in productivity. And I'm convinced that over a period of time, it will come. I have been serving on the Genetic Engineering Advisory Committee when I was in service in the government. So at that time, we were discussing BT cotton. Today, we are discussing mustard, brinjal, so many other crops. So sooner or later, GM crops will come into India. Whether it is through the approved route or whether it will leak in or whatever it is, it will come in. So the thing is, this is an issue we have to handle it so that we have the best results for everyone. For the farmers to have higher productivity, for those who are worried about biodiversity, to make sure that the traditional varieties of crops are not do not become extinct. So we have to preserve the biodiversity of our crops. So all that can be handled. It's not something. Then of course we have to have better systems of monitoring the content of GM in various crops, because European Union has a ban. You cannot export to European Union anything which has GM content. So we have to have labs which can actually measure, well, is the GM content 1%, 0.5%, 0.2%? So do we have those kind of labs? So, all kinds of things need to be done. But per se, GM itself is not. Technology is rarely by itself evil. It's how we use it that makes it good or evil. So that is my response to that. Let's see if you have any more questions.
So I think that would be all. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you so much for answering all the questions and for such a wonderful session.
Okay, thank you, and good luck to all your participants in public policy. I hope you will go on to make your contributions in public policy, if not within the government, from outside the government, by putting your pressures and your suggestions to whoever is in charge. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you so much. For the next session, we have Professor Anil K. Gupta, Head of Division International Cooperation, Advisory Services, E-Learning and Media Portfolio, Director of Projects, and you could please take it from here. Over to you.